Lignum, how to set up and play. First thing you'll do is lay out the game board. I'm setting this up for the full game, so I'm going to use the side of the board for the joinery and buildings expansion. Next you'll set out the supply of wood. You have firewood, softwood, and hardwood. This is the unmilled version of the wood. And then when the wood gets milled, you have milled firewood, milled softwood, and milled hardwood. You're going to start the game by taking 2 firewood pieces and placing them in each of the 6 areas on the board. You'll also create a supply of fodder, food, and money, and you'll also set out the loan cards. At any point in the game, a player can take a loan. They would immediately get $4 from the bank. They would take this loan card and place it in front of them. At the end of the game, they would have to pay back $7. If they ever need to take a second loan, they would flip this card over. They would get another $4 from the bank, but at the end of the game, they would have to pay back a total of $16 for the 2 loans that they took out. 2 loans is the maximum they can take. Next, you're going to take the deck of planned work cards, shuffle those completely, and deal and display cards based on the number of players. You're going to display 1 card per player plus 2. So I'm setting this up for a 2-player game. So 2 plus 2, I'll have 4 cards displayed. The rest of the planned work cards can go back to the game. These are going to be the only planned work cards used in this game. Next are the winter cards. You'll separate them into a first-year winter and a second-year winter. Shuffle each deck separately, then randomly draw 1 card from each deck. You'll also randomly select which side to select, and then just tuck those into their spots. This will be the first winter card, and this will be the second-year winter card. This will indicate how much food and how much heating wood is required at the end of the winter phase. The remaining winter cards can simply be placed back in the game box. Next, take your deck of placement cards, shuffle those completely, and just leave those for now. We're going to use those later in the game. Next, take your deck of task cards, shuffle it completely, deal 1 per player based on the player count, and leave the deck out here. We'll continually use this throughout the game. Next are the building tiles. Take the stack, shuffle it completely. You'll always use 4 buildings plus 1 per player. So again, I'm setting this up for 2 players, so 4 plus 1 for each player, a total of 6 in a 2-player game. The remaining buildings can get returned to the box. These will be the only buildings available in this game. Next, we're going to seed the board. We'll start with the bearers. You're going to set out a number of bearers based on the player count here on the board. 2-player game, I'm setting out 6 bearers. The rest of those can actually be returned to the game box. You'll only always use the amount that gets set up at the beginning of the game. It's the same procedure for the woodcutters. Set out a number of woodcutter meeples based on the player count, and the remaining ones can be placed back in the game box. Next are the sawyer meeples. You'll always have 1 per player plus 1 additional. So 1 for each of the 2 players plus the 1 additional. If this was a 4-player game, you'd have 4 plus 1 additional. And just like the bearers and the cutters, you're going to return the remaining ones to the game box. You're always going to set out 1 joiner at the beginning of the game. You'll actually create a supply of joiners because during each season, 1 will always be available. Next, set out fodder pieces based on the player count. In a 2-player game, I'm only using 1 fodder. You'll remember we create a supply of these because each season will refill back up to the player count number. Next are all of your tokens. The first thing you'll do are separating your craft tokens. The craft tokens are the ones with the orange background. So separate all of those, shuffle those, set them in stacks of 3. And then you'll have your normal equipment tokens. You have your saws, your rafts, your wagons, and your sleds. And then based on the seating, I use this to remind myself of the seating. You're going to lay these out on the game board. You'll take your 3 randomly drawn craft tiles along with the prescribed ones based on the player count. Normally it's always 1 sled, $1 coin, 2 food, 2 raft, 2 wagons and 2 saws and 3 craft tokens. In a 2-player game, you replace one of the wagons and one of the saws with these null value tokens. So you're going to take that set, indicated here, turn them all face down, shuffle them, and put them on the 13 spaces of the game board. So I've shuffled those completely together, and now we can randomly start placing them on these empty spots as you go around the game board. Next, you'll set out the marker for the woodworking phases. You'll set out a marker that also tracks the seasons. The game is played over 2 years. Within each year, there are 4 seasons: spring, summer, fall, and winter. You're going to put players' pawns here on space 0 of the supply path, and you're going to randomize the turn order. Each player is going to have their sawmill board along with their joinery and buildings extension board. They'll also have their woodpile tile. Each player will have a mill worker in their specific color. This mill worker can be used for any of the 3 worker types: the bearers, the woodcutters, or the sawyers. So we'll see how that works. All players are going to start the game with $5. They're going to have 3 pairs of these planned work tokens: 2 1s, 2 2s, and 2 3s. Each player is also going to have 6 cutting area tokens. To start the game, just randomly take one of their cutting area tokens and place it just randomly into an empty spot. So when you put that in there, each player will also get an extra firewood placed in their spot. So since this is a 2-player game, maybe I'll set this one up here, and I'll put that extra firewood token in their spot. So each player is going to start with a cutting area token in a spot all to themselves, and the spot that you put those will have 3 firewoods instead of the normal 2. You're now ready to start the game. So during spring, summer, and fall, there are normally 3 phases to a season. The first phase is to seed the board and have all players select a cutting area. Since we did that as part of setup, in the first season, the first round of the game, that step gets skipped and we go to the second phase, which is the supply path. So you normally have board seeding and cutting area selection, supply path, and the third phase is the woodworking phase. When we get to the winter season of both years, there's actually only 1 phase, and it's just a woodworking phase in winter. Winters don't have the board seeding or the supply path that we're going to talk about next. So now that we've set up the game, we go straight to the supply path phase, starting with the randomly selected first player based on this turn order. So this is the white player. So on the supply path, the player must move forward. They can move forward as far as desired to an eligible space. Basically, an eligible space means they can't stay still, they can never go backwards, they can't go to a spot without room. So for example, if there was a pawn here, they couldn't go to that spot because there is no room. You'll see some spots have room for all players regardless of the player count. And the last thing they can't do is they can't go to a spot that they can't activate. So for example, the white player may decide to go forward as far as they like. They decide to skip these 2 spots. Instead, they come there. They would simply take this equipment token and add it to their player board. Equipment tokens just go here. There are no limits, with the one exception of saws. Saws, you can ever only have a maximum of 4 saws in your possession on your player board. Once the first player makes their decision, we simply follow the turn order. So the red player can go next. They decide to come to this spot. If you ever come to a spot with a food token or the dollar token, you simply just put them back here and replace them for actual food cubes or money tokens. So since they took a food token, they'll just take a food cube from the supply and add it to their food storage. There is no limit to the number of food cubes you can store on your player board, except when we get to the end of winter, all excess food will have to be discarded. The other type of token that a player may come to a spot and take are these craft work tokens. If a player ever gets one of these, they can simply place them on their board. These you're allowed to keep secret until you decide to use them. So once this player made their choice, you simply keep following the turn order over and over and over. It doesn't matter the relative positions on the supply path. You always simply just go one turn at a time in turn order. So the white player would go next, and let's say they decide to go here. You can see there are multiple spots open here. So after they execute this spot, the red player could also decide to come here since there's available spots. So this first type of worker spot are called bearers. They actually help transport wood from your wood pile to your player board. They cost $1 each to purchase. You can purchase as many as you like, no limit. Just keep in mind they're only good for one season. So you're hiring them for the season. So if this player decided to pay $2 and purchase these 2 bearers, they would simply place them on their board. These workers are going to come into play during the woodworking phase. Next, let's cover the cutters. So the wood cutters are used to actually cut down wood from the cutting area to actually get it onto your wood pile. It has to get onto your wood pile before a bearer can actually start transporting it to your player board. Wood cutters, just like bearers, cost $1 each. Here there is a limit. You can only buy a maximum number of wood cutters equal to the number of wood you have selected in your cutting area. So this player has 3 pieces of wood in their cutting area, so the maximum number of cutters they could buy would be 3. The last type of seasonal worker available to players are the sawyers. The sawyers are used to actually cut the unmilled wood into milled planks. You always have a sawyer pawn reserved for you that is always free. So when a player comes here for free, they can always at least get the 1 sawyer pawn reserved for them. There's also the option, as long as it's available, there's always 1 additional sawyer that players have the option to buy for 1 coin. So if a player comes here, they get their free one for 0. And then once a player exercises the option to buy that additional 1 for 1, it goes to their player board. So it's first come, first serve for that extra sawyer. The joiner meeple is always free, but there's only 1 available on the supply path. So the first player to come and land on this spot to exercise this gets to take the joiner for free. They get to place it on their joiner board. A player can ever only have a maximum of 3 joiners throughout the game. So the first one would get placed here. Joiners are going to earn players $1 of income at the start of each spring, summer, and fall. But in each winter, each joiner that the player has is going to cost an additional food on top of the normal winter requirements. Joiners also provide an end game benefit. For each joiner you have, you've got the ability to sell a piece of milled wood that you added to your joinery during the task phase, which we'll talk about. Next is the fodder spot. By coming here, players can pay $1 to take 1 fodder. Each player can only take 1 fodder per round. So even if this was, for example, a 4-player game and multiple fodders were placed here, if a player came here, they can always only take 1 fodder and pay $1. The fodder taken always has to go onto this storage 3 spot. So if this spot already had a piece of fodder, they could not go to that spot and execute the action. This has to be empty for placement. The fodder can be used later during the woodworking phase to help power wagons during transportation. Next is the planned work spot. By coming here, players can get an advantage in the game, a special benefit, but they have to plan to use it in a future season. So let's say the white player came to the planned work spot. They're going to take a pair, 1 pair of their planned work tokens, either 1 season in advance, 2 seasons, or 3 seasons in advance. Let's say they take their 2 seasons in advance. They're going to put 1 of the tokens on the benefit they'd like to get, and they'll put the other one based on the token used that far forward into the future. So since they're planning to use this benefit 2 seasons into the future, we're on spring, So 1, 2, that's when that benefit will become active for that player. When a player comes to the planned work section, they're only allowed to plan work for one card. These tokens never get removed. So once this token gets placed there and to the corresponding season in advance, that's going to stay there for the remainder of the game. So since players only have 3 pairs, they can ever only do planned work 3 times. Also, the planned work card will indicate which seasons are eligible for the planned work. So if this player, instead of selecting this card, wanted to select driving, we know they couldn't use their token 3 planned work because winter's not eligible for this planned work card. And 3 seasons ahead would have been 1, 2, 3, and we know that planned work isn't eligible in winter. Now there's no penalty if you don't take advantage of the bonus or anything like that, but if you don't use the benefit in the planned season, then you've basically just wasted the action of coming to the planned work area. Now the cost for coming to the planned work section is based on the number of tokens already on the card. So when this player came here, there were no tokens on the card they selected, so this was free to them. It's always going to be $1 per token already on the card, including your own. So let's say the red player was the next to act and they decide to skip all the way down here. There's an available spot. They could also select this card using the same tokens if they'd like to. They can put their 2 token here and then their 2 token 2 seasons ahead. But since 1 token was already here, the red player's cost for coming here would be $1 paid to the bank since there was 1 token already on the card. So it would simply look like that, and then both players, since they both did the same planned work using the same token in the same season, would look like this on the planned work. Now both players would get that planned work benefit in the same season. It's even okay for the same player to select the same card again. So let's say this was a whole nother season, right? And they want to select that card all over again. As long as they have an available pair, they can place it there and place it here would be 1 season ahead. Since there were 2 tokens already on the card, including their own, they would have had to pay $2 to the bank to come here again. Another spot is the building spot. By coming here, players can take a building onto their player board. There is no cost. It's free to take a building. They just select one of the available buildings. That gives them an immediate and a persistent power, and they place it on their player board. Players can only select 1 building for free by coming here, and these buildings never get removed. So you can see players only have 2 spots on their joinery board. So a player can only ever have 2 buildings maximum in a game. Another spot is the task card spot. So by coming here, a player can take a maximum of 1 of the displayed task cards. It will cost $1 to the bank to take that card. The player would simply take the card, put it in their playing area. This offers endgame money if you complete the task card. There's no penalty if you don't complete it. Also, these task cards do not get immediately refilled when one gets taken. This will only get refilled back to the base supply when we do the reseeding of the board. So as players come here, if the white player decided to come here next, this is the only one available to them this season. And again, by coming here, a player can only take a maximum of 1 of the displayed task cards, but there is no limit to the total number of task cards that they can take throughout the game and have in front of them. The final major spot is the market. By coming here, players can buy saws and food, as many as they want for 1 each, but you will remember players can only have a maximum of 4 saws on their player board. They can also, in addition to buying saws and food, they can also sell like sets of craft tokens. So if they have 2 identical of any type, they can earn the money printed there, or if they have 3 sets or even 4 of one kind, they can earn that dollar paid by the bank to them immediately. The last spot along the supply path is the forest clearing. By coming here, a player will basically end their supply path turns, but they're securing their position when it comes to cutting wood. Other players that haven't ended their supply path can continue taking turns following the normal turn order, stopping at as many spots as they like, but the white player would no longer be in that turn cycle. Once all players have arrived at the forest clearing, that will end the supply path phase, and now we're ready to go to the woodworking phase, starting with the first sub-phase, which is wood cutting. During the woodwork phases, you always use this forest clearing order, so the white player will always go first. So that's why it was important for this player to get here, because starting with cutting, they're going to take the first actions. During cutting, the player will get to transfer wood from their cutting area to their woodpile. They get to transfer one wood piece per woodcutter used. These are the brown meeples. So this player may decide, I'm going to use these 3 woodcutters. They can simply just place them back there, and they would get all 3 of these pieces of wood immediately put onto their wood pile. There is no limit to the number of wood that can sit here and stack on the wood pile, and it'll never expire. Also keep in mind that each player has this mill worker in their color, and this can always be used as a joker or a jack of all trade to do the work of the woodcutters, the sawyers, or the bearers. So let's say that player only had 2 woodcutters purchased during the supply phase. They could use those 2 woodcutters along with their mill worker. Just simply put that down to indicate you used it, because you can only use it once per season, and that's another way they could have gone those 3 pieces of wood transferred to their wood pile. But since they had 3 woodcutters, they didn't have to use their mill worker for that task. Now during the first season of the game, the forest clearing order isn't that important, because you'll remember during setup, each player got to place their woodcutting token into an empty area. In subsequent seasons, there's the possibility that both players might find their cutting tokens in the same area. So that's an example of when this would have been really important, because the white player, first in the forest clearing order, would have gotten the opportunity to cut all that wood and transfer it to their wood pile before the next player in turn order. So when that happens, any subsequent players, you may have 2 or even 3 or 4 players all selected the same area, subsequent players have 2 options. They can either decide to cut any remaining wood that was in the area, but this white player took all of it, or the second option they have is to pay $1 to the bank, and then they can simply move their token to an empty area. And by empty, we mean it doesn't have any cutting tokens of other players. But in this example, we know this player was alone in their area. They're next in the turn order during the cutting sub-phase. They only have 2 woodcutters, so they'd like to use their mill worker. So they'll turn their mill worker down, turn in the 2 woodcutters back to this area. So that'll give them a total of 3 woodcutting capabilities, and they could move that to their wood pile. Once all players have completed their cutting, we move to the next woodworking phase, which is log driving. Basically, any wood that was placed on the river in a prior season is now arriving at the player board. And you can see whenever a wood arrives to the player's area here, they always have to make a decision. It's either going to go to their sawing section or their selling section. But since no wood was placed here, since it's the first round of the game, this would simply get skipped in the first spring. After log driving, if there was any wood on the river, we'd get it. Now we move to transportation. There's 3 ways to transport wood from your wood pile down to your player board. Either manually, by carrying it on bearer's back, or by having a bearer use a wagon or even a raft. So let's cover the simplest one first. You can simply use one bearer to take one piece of wood. It would be manual labor. They would carry it on their back, so you could simply take that bearer, return it there, and take this one piece of wood. Just like when wood came off a raft, you always have to make that decision between putting it in your sawing area or putting it in your sail area. You can split the wood up and make different decisions, but once you place it, it's locked in that spot. You can no longer transfer it freely. Wood can stay indefinitely, no limits, in both of these sections. Another way to transport wood from your wood pile is to use rafts. It always takes at least one bearer to man a set of rafts, but then you could transport number of wood equal to the number of rafts that you use. So let's say you use one bearer and you use 2 rafts because that's all you had. If you had 3 rafts or 4 rafts, it's always 1 wood per raft. Since there's 2 rafts here, you would take these 2 pieces of wood, and this is now where they go onto the river. And you'll get these during the next log driving subphase. So there's going to be a delay, but it only takes 1 bearer to man any number set of rafts, 1 log piece per raft. And then this would get returned, and then these would get returned simply to the supply. The third way to transport wood is by using a wagon. So let's say this player wanted to save their rafts, and they don't want to have to wait. So let's undo that. We'll put the wood back there. What they can do to immediately get the wood is to use a wagon along with some fodder and 1 bearer. So it only takes 1 bearer and 1 wagon, and then it'll take 1 piece of fodder. And you would simply, if you use the fodder, you actually slide it down. And you can see, depending on which storage area the fodder came from, this indicates how much wood you can actually transport from your wood pile. So if you were using fodder in this section, you could transport up to 3 wood. Now if the fodder was already down here, and you use the fodder along with 1 bearer and 1 wagon, then it would only allow you to transport 2 wood. So to complete that example, the player would simply return the bearer, they would slide the fodder to the left, they would have to turn in the wagon, and they could transport up to 3, but they only have 2, and it comes immediately. They still have to make that same decision of whether to put it in their saw area or their sail area, or they could even split it and do something like that. A couple rules about using the wagon. You always have to use fodder in this storage 2 position first. So let's say in a subsequent season, maybe the player got another fodder and they wanted to use a wagon. Even if they had 3 pieces of wood they wanted to transfer by using that larger size fodder, they have to use this one first. So they would have to expend this. Now if they had an extra bearer, or maybe they wanted to use their mill worker and they had another wagon, they could use this on the same turn, slide that to the left after they use that one, and then, assuming they had enough wood to transport, do that all over again. So per bearer and wagon and fodder, it allows you to transport either 3 or 2 wood from your wood pile immediately to your board. And then the final reminder is the fodder doesn't slide down unless you use it. So if the player decided to transport another way, that fodder would just simply stay there. But you'll remember, you can only acquire new fodder during the supply path if your storage 3 spot is empty. If it's full, there's no spot to place it. Once each player has completed their transportation, now we're ready to move on to sawing. Always remember, during these subphases, we're following the forest clearing turn order. During the sawing phase, for each saw and sawyer, you can cut 1 piece of wood as long as it's in your sawing area. So since this player has 2 pieces, they can cut up to 2. Remember, these can stay here indefinitely and they can saw them in a different phase. But they've got their 1 sawyer that they can return back to the game board, and they also have their mill worker that can be used as a sawyer. And they have 2 saws in their supply. So each of those worker they used plus the 2 saws allows them to cut these 2 pieces of wood. This is the conversion chart. So we can see for 1 piece of firewood, you get 4 pieces of milled firewood. So simply follow this conversion chart. Once the wood is milled, the player now has to decide whether it goes into their firewood storage or goes immediately to their sale area. So let's say the player decides to cut both of these, and they're going to move half of that up to here and then half of it over to there. So completing this example, we saw that they simply just return these 2 pieces to the supply because they sawed them to translate them into these pieces. They can evenly decide to divide these or do anything they like, but they do have to make a decision, and they'll decide to do that. Once you make that decision, the pieces are locked in those areas. There's no limit to the number of pieces that can get stored here, nor is there a limit to the number of pieces here. Getting firewood is important because you'll remember at the end of the winter, when we get to that season, each player will have to turn in heating planks based on the requirement of the card. It can be any type of wood that was milled into the planks. Obviously, it's more efficient to mill firewood. Another point to remember is that these workers, the bearers, the cutters, the sawyers, they're only seasonal workers. So if the player purchased them and didn't get a chance to use them, they don't get to retain them. They're always going to get to go back to the supply after we get through their use subphase. Once all players have completed their sawing, we now move on to the task phase. During the task phase, players are allowed to move eligible pieces of wood either to task cards that they've collected in front of them or to their joinery. To be eligible, the wood had to have been dried the appropriate amount of time. Any wood in this section has a +1 drying. Any wood in this section is +2. So we can see on this task card, for example, it's calling for 3 pieces of milled wood. The firewood had to have come from the +1 area, the softwood from the +2 area, and the hardwood from neither of those areas. It would have had to come from an area that had no drying. So in this example, we see the player has no eligible wood for that task card, but let's say hypothetically that firewood was in the +1. They could take that and simply add it to the card there. It's okay to have this partially completed. At the end of the game, we're going to evaluate whether this task was fulfilled, and if so, that player would get that amount of money at game end. The other option during the task phase is to place wood into the joinery. You do not need a joiner to place the piece of wood. You're only going to need the joiner there at the end of the game to potentially sell those pieces of wood. You can see to place here, it has to be a milled piece of wood with a +1 aging, and then each subsequent piece you place has to be unique. It cannot be equal to the one placed here. So again, let's assume this was a +1. The player could, during the task phase, place this. Now, they can place as many as they'd like during the task phase. You can add to task cards, you can add to your joinery, but we can see the next one placed here would either have to be a +1 softwood or a +1 hardwood, so it's not equal to this. So if the player throughout the game did place all 3 pieces of milled wood, they would have to be 3 unique pieces, and at the time of placement would have had to have been a +1. The benefit for placing milled wood into your joinery is because you're going to get a higher bonus for selling it during the game's final sale than you normally would throughout the course of the game. Just always keep in mind during the task phase that any wood, eligible wood that gets transferred to task cards or to your joinery has to come from this area. The wood cannot ever be taken off of your sawing area or your heating area. Once all players have made their task decisions, now we move on to the sale phase. During the sale phase, players may sell any or all of their wood from their sale or drying areas. You simply consult this conversion chart to see how much money you would get from the bank, either for milled pieces or unmilled pieces based on the type. For example, you can see an unmilled piece of hardwood is worth no money during the sale phase. During the sale phase, any wood that is in this final drying area must be sold at this time. In addition to the prices on the conversion chart, anytime you sell wood from either this spot or this spot, you can see it offers a +1 or a +2 bonus if it's coming from these spots on top of the normal revenue. Once all players have made their sale decisions, we're now ready to go to the final phase, which is drying. During drying, each player may move each piece of wood 1 space to the right as long as they abide by the capacity limits. So you can see each of these sections can either have 2 pieces of any type of milled wood or 1 piece of unmilled. So this player has to make a decision. They could either move that piece there, leaving the rest here, because that would be the maximum, 1 piece of unmilled, or they can decide to move 2 pieces. You're always going to start by moving wood that's further to the right. So let's say this was the example. So before having to decide on this, the player would first slide these over, making room here, and then they could make that decision whether to move this one or these 2. Once you've completed the drying phase, you can simply reset the marker back there. We're now going to advance the season marker and start the first phase, which is reseeding the board and having players simultaneously select their cutting area. So the first part of reseeding is make sure all players return the seasonal workers to their spots and also reset any mill workers that were used in the prior season. Next, any tokens that weren't taken during the prior supply path can simply get removed from the game board and returned to the supply. Any craftwork tokens that weren't taken can simply be removed from the game now. Next, you'll take the prescribed set of tokens just like you did during setup, shuffle those completely, and randomly seed those on the 13 empty spots. Next, you'll refill the fodder up to the player limit. You'll make sure one joiner is available, and you'll refill the task cards now based on the limit from the number of players. When you're checking the joiner spot, this is now the best time to pay players $1 per joiner that they have on their player board. They're going to get $1 of income instantly from the bank. So if they had one joiner, they'd get $1. If they had up to the maximum of 3 joiners on their board, they'd get $3 now at the start of this season. Players can now take back their cutting tokens, and we're going to see what additional wood and food is now going to be added to the board by drawing a placement card. Now this is based on the number of players. It's always the number of players minus 1. So in a 2-player game, I'm only going to draw 1 placement card, and the card's going to indicate which cutting areas are going to receive which type of wood, as well as which areas are going to have food cubes added to it. So this placement card, for example, is going to tell us to add 2 firewood to cutting area 1. We're going to add 1 hardwood to cutting area 3, and that's in addition to any wood that was left over from the prior round. And we're going to add 1 softwood to cutting area 5. It's also telling us to add a cube of food each to areas 2 and 6. At the end of evaluating the placement cards, if an area has no wood in it, you always add 1 firewood to that area. After you've completed the placement card, you can simply remove that from the game. Now players are ready to secretly and simultaneously select which cutting area they'd like to target. So players will select from one of their 6 cutting area tokens, do that in secret, and then simultaneously reveal all player tokens. And based on where they selected, place those now immediately in the cutting area. So we can see in this example, both players selected cutting area 2, so both these tokens would go here. At this time, you are now going to evenly distribute any food in this area. So since the 1 cube cannot be evenly distributed between 2 players, it's going to simply remain there. If there were 2 food cubes here, each player would get 1. If 1 player all by themselves came here, you would evenly distribute all the food cubes to the players. So this player could literally get all the food cubes in this one area. And it's actually during this forest area selection area that food is taken. It's never during the forest clearing section at the end of the supply path. That's only for cutting wood. So even if this cube was here during the cutting wood section, it would not be claimed. It's only during this forest selection area that when players select their area, they can evenly distribute the food cubes between the players in the area, and any remainders simply stay. After players have selected their area and have evenly distributed any food, we're now going to reset the turn order. It's going to be the inverse of the forest clearing area. So since the red player got here last, they're actually going to be first in the new supply path. So it's the reversed order of the forest clearing area. Update this. Now you can move the pawns back to spot 0 and simply follow this turn order and begin the supply path phase, beginning with the first player. One area we haven't covered yet is hut construction. At any point during the game, players can construct huts, by turning in these 3 craftwork tokens to create a hut. So if the players have those tokens on their game board, they can simply declare, I've got that, I've got this, and this is a wild card that can substitute for any 3 of those. I'm going to turn these into a hut. You simply turn all 3 of them over, and now you have 3 hut tokens that can be immediately assigned on your game board. There are 3 different types of powers that these huts can be assigned to. You could assign them all to the same one, or you can evenly distribute them any way you like. Now once you assign these, they're locked into those special powers. And these powers can be used anytime during the supply phase, as you're moving around and selecting spaces, or during the woodworking phase. The only time these can't be used is when the board is getting reset and players are choosing their cutting area. But at any point during supply phase and woodworking phase, players can freely choose to use these hut tokens and earn the special power. The first hut effect is drying. It's a 1 times drying, so for each hut token you turn in, you can choose 1 piece of wood, unmilled or milled, and dry it 1 space by moving it to the right. If you were turning in multiple hut tokens from that same spot, you could, for example, turning in 2 tokens, you could go 1, 2, or you could move 2, 1. The next one is the food effect. For each token you turn in, you can take the entire food supply from a cutting area. So by turning this one in, you could immediately take all the food there or all the food there. It's all the cubes from one area. The last hut effect is the mill worker. These will give you the equivalent of having additional mill workers that can be used as bearers, cutters, or sawyers, equivalent to the number of hut tokens that you decide to use. There is no limit to the number of hut effects that you can accumulate, and remember, you can gather these craftwork tokens and decide to convert them into huts whenever you decide, but once they're converted and flipped over, you have to make the decision to assign those, and it takes those 3 different ones. That's the only one that can't be used to create a hut. That symbol is only used as part of the selling process. Players are now going to follow the supply path, as we've discussed before. But here's a situation where it's going to be very important who completes the supply path first and decides to exit out. So for example, if red decides to advance all the way there after picking up a couple areas and white's only able to get there second, when we get to the woodworking phase, cutting of which is the first phase, red's going to get the opportunity to cut first. And since they're both in the same area, they're going to get access to those 2 pieces of wood. And as a reminder, after they're done, the next player in turn order has that decision to make. They can take just remaining wood, or they can pay $1 to the bank to move to any empty area that's available. And then after they move to that empty area, they can decide to use their woodcutters to cut whatever wood's available in that spot. When you're moving to these areas, you're not picking up food. That's only done at the beginning when the cutting areas are selected. Now let's talk about winter. When you finish the woodworking phases in fall and advance the season marker, winter is a special season. There will be no resetting of the board or supply path. We're going to go straight to a woodworking phase unique just to winter, and that's the track up there. So we're going to follow the turn order in the forest clearing selection that resulted at the end of this prior season, and now go through these special woodworking phases. The first step of winter, as a bonus, each player is going to get to choose 1 piece of unmilled wood and add it immediately to their wood pile. The player can choose any type of their choice. So this player may decide, I'm going to get a piece of hardwood added to my wood pile. All players get that bonus. And the piece chosen for that bonus comes from the supply, not the board. So cutting in winter works a little bit differently. You have to use your mill worker, because remember, there was no supply phase, so you have no woodcutters. So if you decide to use your 1 mill worker, you can immediately get 2 pieces of firewood, specifically firewood, added to your wood pile. So if you decided during cutting during the winter you want to use your 1 mill worker to get those 2 pieces of firewood, they would come from the supply onto your wood pile. If, in addition, you wanted to use some extra huts, you would get one additional piece of firewood added to your wood pile. But you may decide not to use that. Maybe you've got enough wood and you want to save this one mill worker for later phases during this winter woodworking. The next phase in winter is transportation. During the winter, the river is frozen, so there's no way to get wood from your wood pile to your player board unless you have a sled, and the sled has to be manned by your mill worker. So for the mill worker and a sled that you turn in, you can transport 2 pieces of wood from your wood pile down to your player board. You can also add an extra piece of wood per food that you decide to turn in, up to a maximum of 3. So in this example, in the wintertime, this player hasn't used their mill worker yet. Maybe they'll decide to use their mill worker. They'll turn in the sled that they've gotten in a prior supply path phase, and now they can transport 2 pieces of wood from their wood pile immediately down to their player board. As normal, they always have to make that decision. Maybe they'll decide to put them both into their sawing area. If they want to turn in extra pieces of food, they can transport an extra piece of wood per food, up to 3. Maybe they'll turn in 1 piece of food just so they can get 1 extra piece of wood that they'll decide to place here. After winter transportation is winter sawing. A player can use their mill worker along with a saw to cut wood. So for this player, they would like to cut these 2 pieces of wood that they have in their sawing area. They have already used their mill worker for transportation this winter, but they do have some hut tokens that they assign to the mill worker spot. So they can turn these 2 in, they act as mill workers. They have 2 saw tokens they can turn in, and they can now cut these 2 pieces of wood. For the softwood, they're going to earn 3 planks, and for the hardwood, they're going to earn 1 plank per the conversion chart. These 2 pieces would get turned into the supply as normal, and as always, the player now needs to decide whether they're going to go to the heating area or to the sale area. Obviously, it's more efficient, so they're going to move those over to the sale area. Next is the winter task phase, but you'll see on the player board, this task phase is only performed during the second winter, not the first. If it's the first winter, you skip this and go straight to food. Let's assume this was the second winter and we would do the task phase. It works as normal. You take any eligible wood pieces and can assign them to task cards and or your joiner. So in this example, we could see the player has this piece of hardwood that doesn't require any drying. They need a softwood with a +2, which they can take from there. And they have a firewood that needs to come exactly from the +1 spot. And so now this task card is filled. It's going to stay here until the end of the game, and that's when that money will be rewarded. Just always remember that the task phase is only performed in the second winter. You'll also notice there is no sale phase, no drying phase in winter. But each of the winters does have a food and heating phase. For the food phase, all players will check, based if it's the first winter or the second winter, what the food and the heating requirements are. The first thing they have to do is pay the food requirement. You have to pay the food listed on the winter card. In addition, you have to pay 1 food per joiner you have on the board. You simply take the food in your food storage area and turn that back into the supply. This player doesn't have any joiners, so they only have to pay the base food cost of 5. If a player is unable to fully meet the food requirement, they have to pay $3 per missing piece of food. If they don't have enough money, they have to take out loans to pay that amount. And if that's still not enough, they're forced to sell wood from their board to generate enough money. And in that example only, they're allowed to sell wood from any part of their board to pay for a food shortage. After you turn in your food for the food requirement, you have to discard any excess food. You're not allowed to keep food after the winter time. The last step in winter is to pay your heating requirement. Just like food, Check the winner card to find out how many pieces of milled wood is required for heating. It can be any type. The most efficient is to obviously use firewood that you've put into your heating storage area. Simply check the requirement and turn in the required amount. This player has 7 pieces, which meets the requirement. Excess firewood is allowed to be kept from round to round. And just like food, it's the same penalty if you're unable to fully pay the wood requirement. You have to pay $3 per missing piece of milled wood, then take loans, and then potentially sell wood from any area on your board to make up the difference. If this was the end of the first winter, we'd advance the year marker, and we'd start spring by reseeding the board, selecting cutting areas. If it's the end of the second winter, we go to the final sale of the game. In the final sale of the game, you get to sell any and all wood from your drawing and your sale areas. Any wood that you have in your sawing area or your firewood or your wood pile cannot be sold. It's only wood in this area. You're also allowed to sell one type of wood on the river. So if you had firewood and hardwood and softwood, decide which one to sell. Obviously, you're still going to earn prices based on the conversion chart. Next, players can sell their joinery wood, so as long as a joiner is aligned with a piece of wood, that can be sold. This piece of wood was placed, but there's no joiner to sell it, so this couldn't be sold, but this one could. So for every piece of wood with a joiner, you get the normal rate for selling that piece of wood, plus a $3 bonus per piece. Next, you would get any money for all of your completed tasks in front of you. You have to pay back any loans that you took. Now you simply add up the money. Most money wins the game. Before we end, let's cover all of the planned work cards and buildings. The first one is craft work. This allows you to sell craft work tokens at the market at higher prices than normally gained. The next one is cutting. This allows you to hire up to an additional 2 cutters over your limit. Normally you're limited to the amount of wood that your token is in. Also, on your cutting turn during the forest clearing, you can move up to 2 of your cutters to another area to cut wood, possibly prior to another player. Next is drying. This allows you to place 2 times the capacity in the first drying area. Now, always keep in mind with planned work, you only get this benefit for the season that you plan to use it. So during that season, you can put double capacity in that first drying area, and then you may continue to dry that wood. Next is food supply. This allows you to receive 2 food per piece of wood that you place on the river. The next is heating supply. This allows you to get 6 milled pieces per sawed firewood versus the normal 4. The next is hut construction. It allows you to only use 2 tokens to construct a hut. You would flip these and assign just those 2 flip tokens. The next is log driving. This allows you to place up to 3 wood onto the river without having to use a raft or a bearer. And you may also use the river as normal. The next is overtime. At the start of the planned season, you're allowed to place 1 black hardwood from the supply directly onto your wood pile. The next is sawing. This allows you to saw 2 wood pieces per sawyer and saw. And the final planned work card is trade. This allows you to sell any rafts, sleds, and or wagons at the market for $2 each. And now for each of the buildings. The first building is the drying area upgrade. In your drying areas, you may store 2 wood of any combination, milled or unmilled. If you have the field, fodder is always free of charge when you acquire it. If you have the inn, planned work is always free of charge, even if there are tokens on the card. With the market stand, you may sell food at the market for $1 each. With the office, during the final sale of the game, you can receive $1 for every task card in your possession, whether it's fulfilled or not. With the small joinery, during the final sale, any wood sold from your joinery is a +4 instead of the normal +3. But as usual, you need a joiner to sell each piece. The next building is the small storage area. During any of the task phases, you can place 1 milled piece of wood on the small storage area. And then later in the game, during the second winter task phase, you can move that piece of milled wood to any of your task cards as long as the color matches, but it can be used to satisfy any drying requirement. The small workshop allows you to use reed instead of shingle for building a hut. If you have the storeroom, you require one less food each winter, and you're also allowed to keep surplus food after that first winter. And finally, the water channel. When using rafts, you may immediately move one wood to your board. As usual, you've got to choose your saw or your sail area, but one piece of wood is not going to have any delay when using rafts. And that should be everything you need to set up and play Lignum.